The smell of expensive cologne and fake smiles hit me the moment I walked through the mahogany doors of the Winston estate. My 40th birthday party, a surprise I'd seen coming from a mile away, orchestrated by my wife Laura's insufferable family with all the subtlety of a freight train. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. "There's the birthday boy," shrieked Susan, Laura's mother, her voice cutting through the crowd like nails on a chalkboard. She rushed toward me in her designer dress, arms outstretched, diamond bracelet catching the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. I forced a smile and accepted her air kiss, the kind where rich people pretend to show affection without actually touching. "Thanks, Susan. This is unexpected." "Oh, we just had to celebrate our Jason," she gushed, though I caught the slight emphasis on our, like I was a pet they'd reluctantly adopted. Laura worked so hard to put this together with Scott's help. Scott Winston, my boss, the man whose construction company employed me as a site manager and whose sprawling North Texas mansion we were currently standing in. Tall, silver-haired, with a kind of confident smile that came from never having to check his bank balance. He appeared at Susan's elbow as if summoned. "Jason, happy birthday, buddy." His handshake was firm, his teeth too white. "Hope you don't mind us borrowing your beautiful wife to help plan this shindig." There it was, that casual possessiveness disguised as friendliness. I'd been noticing it more lately, the way Scott's hand lingered on Laura's shoulder during company barbecues, how he always seemed to have a reason to call her directly instead of going through me. "Not at all," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Laura's always been good at organizing things." The party swirled around us. About 50 people crammed into Scott's living room, which was bigger than most people's entire houses. Leather furniture that probably cost more than my truck, oil paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum, and a wet bar that could stock a restaurant. My coworkers from the construction sites looked uncomfortable in their borrowed ties, while Laura's family and Scott's social circle moved through the space like they owned it. Which I suppose they did. I grabbed a beer from the bar, imported, naturally, and found myself gravitating toward the sliding glass doors that led to the pool area. Through the reflection in the glass, I could see Laura across the room, animated in conversation with her sister Melissa and brother-in-law Rick. She looked beautiful in her black cocktail dress, her auburn hair swept up in a way that showed off the diamond earrings I'd given her for our anniversary. The same earrings she'd complained weren't big enough. "Quite a spread, huh?" I turned to find Eddie Martinez beside me, my best friend since high school and the only person here I actually wanted to see. He ran a boxing gym downtown and looked exactly like what he was, a former cop who'd seen too much and decided to help kids hit heavy bags instead of each other. "Yeah, Scott really outdid himself," I said, taking a long pull from my beer. Eddie studied my face. "You okay, man? You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes." Before I could answer, a burst of laughter erupted from Laura's group. Not the polite chuckles that had been floating around the party, but genuine belly-deep laughter, the kind that made other conversations pause. "Oh my God, you're terrible," Laura gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. Scott had joined their circle, and whatever he'd said had them all in stitches. Even Rick, who usually had the personality of wet cardboard, was grinning like an idiot. "I'm just saying," Scott continued, his voice carrying across the room. "Some people are naturally gifted at certain things, and others—" He shrugged with mock helplessness. "Well, they try their best." More laughter. Laura caught Scott's arm, steadying herself as she giggled. The gesture was intimate, familiar. Too familiar. "Jason's very reliable," Melissa chimed in, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that came naturally to people who'd never worked a day in their lives. "Steady as a rock, aren't you, Jason?" They'd noticed me watching. The group turned toward me with identical smiles, the kind you'd give a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. "We were just talking about natural talents," Scott explained, his eyes twinkling with what I was beginning to recognize as malice. "I was telling them how some people are born leaders, visionaries, you know? And others are more suited to following directions." "Taking orders," Rick added helpfully. "There's nothing wrong with that," Susan jumped in, her voice taking on that overly sweet tone people used when they were about to insult you. "The world needs workers, Jason. Honest, simple people who do what they're told." The room had gone quiet. Not completely. There was still background chatter and the clink of glasses, but our little corner had become a theater, and I was apparently the entertainment. Laura was looking at me with something like pity in her eyes. "Scott was just saying how lucky I am to have such a dependable husband." "Dependable?" I repeated slowly, tasting the word. "That's one way to put it." Oh, come on, Scott laughed, slapping me on the back hard enough to slosh beer from my bottle. Don't be so sensitive. We're all friends here. Friends. Right. I excused myself and headed for the bathroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. The hallway was lined with photographs, Scott at various charity events, shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at grand openings, a successful man's successful life, documented and displayed. The bathroom was bigger than my daughter's bedroom, all marble and gold fixtures. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. 40 years old, graying at the temples, with the kind of weathered hands that came from actual work. Not handsome like Scott, not smooth like Rick, not wealthy like any of them, but not stupid either. When I came out, I nearly collided with Melissa, who was hovering in the hallway like she'd been waiting for me. Jason, honey, can we talk? I followed her into Scott's study, a room that screamed important man with its leather-bound books and massive oak desk. Melissa closed the door behind us and turned to face me with an expression I'd seen before, the look of someone about to deliver bad news they thought was good advice. I know tonight's been a little awkward, she began. Has it? Look, I'm going to be straight with you because I care about you and the girls. Laura's not happy, Jason. She hasn't been for a while. I set my beer down on Scott's desk, not bothering to look for a coaster. Is that so? She needs more than what you can give her, intellectually, emotionally, financially. Scott understands her in ways that you... She trailed off, apparently realizing how that sounded. In ways that I what, Melissa? She sighed, like I was being deliberately obtuse. You're a good man, Jason. A good father. But Laura's always been ambitious, always wanted more from life. She's not built for this suburban housewife thing, living paycheck to paycheck, worrying about bills. We're not exactly struggling. Compared to what she could have? Jason, be realistic. Look around you. She gestured toward the door, indicating the party beyond. This is the kind of life Laura was meant for. Scott can give her things you never could. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I picked up my beer and took a slow sip, buying time to process what I'd just heard. Are you telling me my wife is having an affair? Melissa's face went through several expressions at once. Surprise, guilt, defiance, and something that might have been relief. I'm telling you that Laura deserves to be happy, and if you really love her, you'll want what's best for her, even if that means stepping aside. I laughed. Actually laughed, which seemed to surprise her. Stepping aside, that's a nice way to put it. Jason, how long? She looked away. Does it matter? It matters to me. About 6 months, maybe longer. Look, it's not like they planned this. It just happened. They have a connection, a real partnership. Scott values her opinion, includes her in important decisions. He makes her feel alive again. 6 months. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for our mortgage, our daughter's school expenses, our family vacations, my wife had been finding herself in the arms of my boss. And you all knew. It wasn't a question. The way they had all been looking at me tonight, the inside jokes, the careful phrasing, they'd all been in on it. We were trying to protect you, Melissa said quietly. And the girls. We thought maybe it would run its course, but... Jason, they're in love. Real love. The kind that doesn't just go away. I finished my beer and set the empty bottle down next to the wet ring it had left on Scott's expensive desk. Thanks for the heads up, Melissa. Really, it's been illuminating. I left her standing in the study and walked back toward the party, but instead of rejoining the crowd, I slipped out the front door. The Texas heat hit me like a wall, even at 8 in the evening. I sat on the steps of Scott's mansion and called my daughters. Hi, Daddy. Beth's voice was bright and happy. At 12, she was still young enough to think her father hung the moon. Hey, sweetheart. How's movie night going? Great. We're watching that princess movie again. Janie fell asleep during the scary part, but she's awake now. Are you having fun at your party? I looked back at the house, where warm light spilled from every window and the sound of laughter drifted out like a taunt. Yeah, baby, lots of fun. Tell Janie I love her, okay? I'll see you both tomorrow. Love you too, Daddy. The line went silent, and I sat there in the gathering darkness, thinking about natural talents and stepping aside and the kind of life my wife was meant for. 20 minutes later, Laura found me. There you are. Everyone's wondering where the birthday boy went. She settled beside me on the steps, her dress riding up slightly. Are you okay? Melissa said you two talked. We did. Jason. She reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. I wanted to tell you myself. I've been trying to find the right time, the right words. 6 months, Melissa said, maybe longer. Laura's shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Scott's perfectly manicured lawn. I don't know. I just know that I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. What's not fine, Laura? Our marriage? Our family? Us, she said simply. We're not the same people we were when we got married, Jason. We want different things now. I want the same things I've always wanted. You, the girls, a family. I want more than that. There it was. The truth, simple and brutal. More than your family. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood up, brushing dust from my pants. You've been screwing my boss for 6 months, and your entire family knew about it. They threw me a birthday party to celebrate my humiliation, but I'm the one being unfair. It's not like that. What's it like then? Explain it to me, Laura. Help me understand how you and Scott have this deep, meaningful connection while you're lying to my face every night. She started crying then, but they weren't the tears of someone who felt guilty. They were frustrated tears, angry tears, the tears of someone who'd been caught. I never meant to hurt you. But you did it anyway. Yes, she whispered. I did it anyway. We sat there in silence while the party continued without us. Eventually, Laura wiped her eyes and stood up. What happens now? She asked. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd loved since college, the mother of my children, the person I'd built my entire adult life around. She was beautiful, successful, intelligent. Everything Melissa had said was true. She did deserve more than what I could give her. But I deserved more than this. Now? I said. Now we go back inside and finish the party. We smile and laugh and pretend everything's fine. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest. Jason, that's what you want, isn't it? More time to figure things out with Scott? More time to decide what's best for everyone? She nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. Then that's what we'll do. We walked back into the party together, her hand in mine, playing the part of the happy couple. I accepted congratulations and well wishes, thanked Scott for his hospitality, and made small talk about work and weather and all the mundane things that filled the spaces between real conversations. But inside, something had shifted. Something cold and calculating had taken root in my chest, and I found myself studying the people around me with new eyes. These people who'd known about my wife's affair, who'd smiled to my face while laughing behind my back, who'd thrown me a party to celebrate their deception. They thought I was dependable, reliable, steady as a rock. They were right. And that was going to be their first mistake. I woke up alone. Laura's side of the bed was cold, which meant she'd been gone for hours. The clock read 6:47 a.m., a Saturday morning when most people slept in, but apparently my wife had somewhere to be, or someone to be with. I found a note on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker like a consolation prize. Gone for a run. Back later. We need to talk. L. A run. Right. Laura had never been much for exercise, unless you counted the yoga classes she'd started taking 6 months ago. 6 months. The timeline Melissa had given me was starting to make more sense. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where my daughter's swing set stood silent in the morning light. Beth and Janie were still at their sleepover, wouldn't be home until this afternoon, which gave Laura and me plenty of time for that talk she'd mentioned. The house felt different somehow, like a stage set after the audience had gone home. Everything looked the same. The family photos on the refrigerator, Laura's coffee mug in the sink, the stack of bills on the counter. But it all felt hollow now, props in a play I hadn't known I was performing in. My phone buzzed. Eddie. How you holding up, brother? I'm fine. Bullshit. I saw your face last night when you came back inside. You looked like someone had kicked your dog. I took a sip of coffee and considered how much to tell him. Eddie had been a cop for 15 years before he opened the gym. He knew how to read people, how to spot lies and half-truths. There wasn't much point in pretending. Laura's having an affair. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, shit, how long? 6 months, with Scott. Your boss Scott, that pretentious asshole with the fancy car? That's the one. And her family knows? They all know. Apparently I'm supposed to step aside gracefully so Laura can live the life she was meant for. Eddie was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had the flat, professional tone he'd used as a cop. What do you need? I don't know yet. Well, when you figure it out, call me. And Jason, don't do anything stupid. After he hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen and tried to process the magnitude of what I was facing. It wasn't just the affair. Affairs happened, marriages ended, people moved on. It was the conspiracy of it, The way everyone I trusted had been lying to me for months. The casual cruelty of last night's party, where I'd been mocked and pitied while my wife's lover played host. Laura came home at 10:30, flushed and breathless in her running clothes. She avoided my eyes as she grabbed a water bottle from the refrigerator. "Good run?" I asked. "Yeah. Helped clear my head." She sat down across from me at the table, and for a moment we just looked at each other. 20 years of marriage, and it had come to this, and two strangers trying to figure out how to dismantle a life. "I want a divorce," she said finally. I'd been expecting it, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. "Okay." She blinked, apparently surprised by my calm response. "Okay?" "What did you expect, Laura? That I'd beg you to stay, fight for you?" I don't know. Maybe." "Would it change anything?" She looked down at her hands. "No." "Then okay. You want a divorce? We'll get divorced." We talked logistics after that. Lawyers, custody arrangements, who would keep the house. Laura had it all figured out, which told me she'd been planning this conversation for a while. Scott had recommended a lawyer, someone discreet who specialized in complex situations. The girls would stay with me during the week and spend weekends with her. She'd keep her car, I'd keep mine. We'd sell the house and split the proceeds. "What about your job?" she asked. It was a good question. Scott Winston Construction employed about 200 people across North Texas. I'd been with the company for 8 years, worked my way up from general laborer to site manager. It was good work, steady money, and I was respected by the crews I supervised. But now my boss was sleeping with my wife, and everyone in management probably knew it. "I'll figure something out." "Scott doesn't want this to affect your career, Jason. He's not like that." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. How generous of him. "He's a good man. I know you don't want to hear that, but..." "You're right. I don't want to hear that." Laura stood up, her water bottle clutched in her hands like a shield. "I know you hate me right now, and I understand that. But someday, maybe you'll see that this is better for everyone. The girls need to see us happy, even if that means we can't be happy together." "Are you happy, Laura?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is this what you wanted? Sneaking around for 6 months, lying to your husband, breaking up your family? Is that what happiness looks like to you?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm happier than I've been in years." After she left, "Another errand to run," she said. I called my daughters. "Daddy." Janie's voice was bright and excited. "Can we come home now? I miss you." "I miss you too, baby girl. But you're having fun at Emma's house, right?" "Yeah, but I want to show you the picture I drew. It's our whole family, and we're all at the beach." My throat tightened. "That sounds beautiful, sweetheart. I can't wait to see it." "Is Mommy there? Can I talk to her?" "She's not here right now, but I'll tell her you called." After I hung up, I sat in my living room and looked at the family photos scattered across the mantel. Beth's first day of school, Janie learning to ride a bike. Last Christmas morning, all 4 of us in matching pajamas that Laura had insisted on buying. We looked happy in those pictures. Maybe we had been, once. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Ray Kowalski, Dallas PD. I was wondering if we could set up a time to talk." My blood went cold. "About what?" "There was an incident last night at Scott Winston's residence, some property damage. Mr. Winston mentioned you were at the party, thought you might have seen something." Property damage. I thought about Scott's pristine driveway, his collection of expensive cars. "What kind of property damage?" "Someone slashed the tires on Mr. Winston's Porsche. All 4 of them, plus they keyed the paint job pretty good. Probably happened sometime between 8 and 10 p.m. Right around the time I'd been sitting on Scott's front steps, talking to my daughter and then my wife. Right around the time I'd learned about the affair." "I didn't see anything," I said, which was technically true. "Well, if you remember anything that might be helpful, give me a call. These kinds of things, they're usually personal. Someone with a grudge, you know?" After he hung up, I went out to my garage and looked at my tools. Utility knife, still in its case. Screwdrivers, clean and organized on their pegboard. Everything exactly where it should be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here, had borrowed something and put it back. The kind of someone who knew where I kept my tools, who had access to my garage, the kind of someone who might want to make it look like the wronged husband had taken his revenge. I was still standing there when Laura came home, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly mussed despite the ponytail. "The police called," I said without preamble. She froze in the doorway between the kitchen and garage. "What?" "Someone vandalized Scott's car last night. They think I did it." Did you? The question hung between us like an accusation. 20 years of marriage, and she had to ask if I was the kind of man who'd slash tires and key paint jobs. No, Laura, I didn't. She looked relieved, which somehow made it worse. Good. That's good. Scott was worried that you might not take this well. Not take what well? My wife's affair or being framed for vandalism? You're not being framed. It was probably just random. I stepped closer to her, close enough to smell Scott's cologne on her skin. Someone randomly decided to target your boyfriend's car on the same night I found out about your affair. Jason, here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You're going to call Scott and tell him that if he involves the police in our personal business again, things are going to get very complicated for him, because I know things about Winston Construction that the IRS would find very interesting. It was a bluff, mostly, but I'd been managing construction sites for 8 years, had access to payroll records and expense reports. There were always irregularities in companies that size, corners cut, and rules bent. Scott might be clean, but his business probably wasn't. Laura's face went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. That afternoon, Detective Kowalski called back to tell me the case was being dropped. Apparently, Mr. Winston had decided it wasn't worth pursuing, probably just kids playing pranks. When the girls came home that evening, chattering about their sleepover and showing me Janie's crayon drawing of our family at the beach, I held them a little tighter than usual. They were the only pure thing left in my life, the only part of this mess that mattered. But as I tucked them into bed and listened to their prayers, I couldn't stop thinking about the smell of Scott's cologne on Laura's skin, or the way she'd looked at me when she asked if I'd vandalized his car. They thought they knew me, dependable Jason, steady as a rock, the kind of man who took orders and followed directions. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked embarrassed to be there. I signed for them at my kitchen table while Beth and Janie ate cereal and argued about whose turn it was to feed our goldfish. What's that, Daddy? Beth asked, always the more observant of my daughters. Just work stuff, sweetheart. Laura had been staying at her sister's house for the past week, coming by to pick up clothes and spend time with the girls. We'd managed to keep things civil in front of Beth and Janie, but the strain was starting to show. They knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand what. I flipped through the documents while the girls got ready for school. Laura was asking for joint custody, half the house's value, and spousal support. Her lawyer, Scott's recommendation, had been thorough. There were financial disclosures, asset inventories, and a proposed timeline for selling our home. What caught my attention was a small detail buried in the paperwork. Laura had listed her employment as Executive Assistant, Winston Construction. Executive Assistant. That was news to me. Last I checked, she worked in accounting. After dropping the girls at school, I drove to the Winston Construction headquarters, a gleaming glass building in one of Dallas's newer business districts. I'd been there countless times for meetings and company events, but today I was seeing it with different eyes. The receptionist, a young woman named Carrie, who'd always been friendly, looked uncomfortable when she saw me. Hi, Mr. Thompson. Are you here for the management meeting? What management meeting? Her face went red. Oh, I thought... Never mind. Is there something I can help you with? I need to see Scott. He's in a meeting right now, but I can... It's okay, Carrie. I'll wait. I took a seat in the lobby and pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails I'd missed while dealing with the divorce papers. Most were routine, project updates, scheduling changes, the usual administrative noise that came with managing multiple construction sites. But one email made me pause. It was from the HR department, sent to all site managers. Please note that effective immediately, all personnel decisions must be approved by executive management before implementation. Personnel decisions, like hiring and firing, like the authority I'd had for the past 3 years to staff my projects as I saw fit. Jason. I looked up to see Scott approaching, his smile as bright and fake as ever. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most of my crew made in a month. What brings you by? I thought you were at the Henderson site today. I was. Got your HR email about personnel decisions. Wanted to clarify what that means for my projects? Scott's smile flickered for just a moment. Oh, that. Just some corporate restructuring. Nothing for you to worry about. Come on, let's talk in my office. I followed him through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms to the executive floor. Scott's office was exactly what you'd expect. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture, and enough awards and certificates to wallpaper a small room. Drink? He offered, gesturing toward a wet bar that was nicer than most restaurants. I'm good. He poured himself 2 fingers of something expensive and settled behind his desk. So, how are you holding up? I know this situation with Laura is difficult. Situation. Like my wife's affair was a scheduling conflict. I'm managing. Good. Look, Jason, I want you to know that what's happening between Laura and me, it doesn't have to affect your career here. You're a valuable employee, and I'd hate to see personal issues interfere with your professional future. I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. Scott Winston was a handsome man in his early 50s, with the kind of silver fox appeal that women seem to find irresistible. He was also smart, successful, and charming when he wanted to be. But right now, he looked nervous. That's generous of you, Scott, especially considering you've been sleeping with my wife for the past 6 months. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I never intended for it to happen this way. How did you intend for it to happen? Jason, I'm curious. Did you plan to seduce my wife, or was it just a happy accident? Scott set down his drink and leaned forward. Look, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But Laura and I, what we have is real. It's not some casual fling. How romantic. I'm trying to be respectful here. Respectful, I laughed. You threw me a birthday party in your house while you were screwing my wife, and you want to talk about respect? That party was Laura's idea. She thought what? That it would be fun to humiliate me in front of all our friends? Scott was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its smooth confidence. I know how this looks, Jason. I know you think I'm the villain here, but Laura was unhappy long before anything happened between us. She needed someone who understood her ambitions, her potential. And you're that someone. I can give her things you can't. Opportunities, experiences, a life that matches her intelligence and capabilities. There it was again, the casual assumption that I wasn't good enough for my own wife. Speaking of opportunities, I said, I noticed Laura's job title changed. Executive assistant now? Scott's jaw tightened slightly. She's been taking on additional responsibilities. I bet she has. We stared at each other across his expensive desk, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out how much trouble I was going to be, how far I might be willing to push things. What do you want, Jason? It was a good question. What did I want? My wife back? My old life? Revenge? I want my daughters to be happy, I said finally. I want them to have stability and security, no matter what happens between their parents. That's admirable. I also want to understand why my personnel authority got revoked the same week my wife filed for divorce. Scott picked up his drink again, buying time. Like I said, it's just corporate restructuring. Uh-huh, and it has nothing to do with you wanting to make sure I can't cause problems for your business? I think you're being paranoid. I stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the parking garage where his Porsche, now sporting 4 new tires, sat in its reserved spot. You know what I think, Scott? I think you're scared. I think you know that I've been managing your sites for 8 years, that I know where all the bodies are buried, literally in some cases. What's that supposed to mean? I turned back to face him. The Morrison Project. Remember that? The apartment complex where we had to pour concrete over that old septic system because it would have cost too much to remove it properly? Scott's face went pale. That was years ago. 3 years ago, right around the time the city started cracking down on environmental violations. What do you think would happen if someone reported that we'd buried hazardous waste under a residential foundation? You signed off on that decision. I followed orders, like a good, dependable employee. I smiled at him, the same fake smile he'd been giving me for years. But I kept copies of everything, email chains, work orders, inspection reports. Amazing what you can find when you start looking. Scott set his drink down with a sharp click. Are you threatening me? I'm having a conversation, just like you and Laura have been having conversations for the past 6 months. We looked at each other in silence. Outside, Dallas traffic hummed past the building, people going about their normal lives while mine fell apart in a corporate office 40 floors above the street. What do you want? Scott asked again, his voice quieter now. I want my authority restored. I want to finish out my projects without interference, and I want you to stay away from my daughters. Laura and I are going to be together, Jason. That means I'll be part of their lives. Maybe, but not yet. Not until the divorce is final and they've had time to adjust. Scott considered this, his businessman's brain calculating costs and benefits. And in exchange? In exchange, I'll be the model of professionalism. No drama, no problems, no mysterious calls to regulatory agencies. He nodded slowly. Okay, we have a deal. I headed for the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "Oh, and Scott, that cologne you wear, it's a little strong. Might want to tone it down." His face went red, but I was already walking away. That evening, I got a call from Eddie. "How'd it go with the boss today?" "How did you know I saw him?" "Because you had that tone in your voice this morning. The same one you used to get before football games when you were planning to hit someone." I was sitting in my garage, organizing tools that didn't need organizing while I waited for Laura to bring the girls home from dinner. It was one of our new routines, awkward handoffs that felt like prisoner exchanges. I may have rattled his cage a little. Good. Guys like that, they think they can do whatever they want because they've got money and connections. Sometimes they need to be reminded that actions have consequences. Speaking of consequences, I need a favor. Name it. I need you to teach me how to fight. Eddie was quiet for a moment. You know how to fight, brother. I've seen you handle yourself. I know how to throw a punch. That's different than knowing how to fight. This about Scott? This is about being ready for whatever comes next. Okay, Eddie said finally. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., bring water and a mouthguard. After he hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my garage and thought about the conversation with Scott. I'd bought myself some time and space, but I hadn't solved anything. Laura was still leaving me, my family was still broken, and everyone still thought I was just dependable old Jason who'd take whatever they dished out. But I was starting to realize something that surprised me. I didn't want my wife back. What I wanted was for everyone who'd lied to me, manipulated me, and humiliated me to understand that there were consequences for their actions. And I was just getting started. The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and determination. Eddie's place wasn't fancy. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights, and equipment that had seen better decades. But it was real. No mirrors, no juice bar, no membership fees that cost more than most people's car payments. Just a place where people came to hit things and get stronger. First lesson, Eddie said, wrapping my hands with practiced efficiency. Fighting isn't about anger. Anger makes you stupid, gets you hurt. Fighting is about control. It was 6 a.m, and we had the place to ourselves. Eddie had set up a heavy bag in the center of the main floor, its surface scarred and patched from years of abuse. "Show me what you've got," he said, stepping back. I threw a punch at the bag, putting my shoulder into it the way I'd learned in high school. The impact jarred my arm and barely moved the bag. Again. I hit it harder this time, then again, working up a rhythm. After 5 minutes, my shoulders were burning and my knuckles ached despite the wraps. "Okay, stop." Eddie moved beside the bag, holding it steady. "You're fighting like you're mad at the bag, like it did something to you personally." "Isn't that the point?" "The point is to be effective. You want to hurt someone, you don't get emotional about it. You get technical." He demonstrated, throwing a sharp jab that made the bag jump. "See the difference? I'm not trying to eliminate the bag. I'm just hitting it in the right place, the right way." We worked for an hour. Footwork, balance, how to throw a punch without breaking my hand. Eddie was a patient teacher, but he didn't coddle me. When I dropped my guard, he tapped me in the ribs. When I telegraphed a punch, he slapped it aside. "You're thinking too much," he said as we took a water break. "This isn't construction management. You can't plan every move 3 steps ahead." "Then how do you know what to do?" "You practice until your body knows what to do without your brain getting in the way. Then, when someone comes at you, you just react. And if they're bigger than me, stronger," Eddie grinned, "then you better be smarter." After the workout, we sat on the gym's front steps and watched Dallas wake up around us. Traffic was picking up. People heading to jobs and schools and all the normal places that made up a normal life. "You want to talk about what's really going on?" Eddie asked. I told him about the meeting with Scott, about the divorce papers and the job title change and the way everyone seemed to think they could manage my life for me. "They're trying to box you in," he said when I finished. "Make you feel like you don't have any choices except the ones they give you." "Maybe I don't." "Bullshit. You always have choices. They might all suck, but you've got them." A group of teenagers walked by, probably heading to the high school a few blocks away. They looked so young, so certain that the world made sense and that adults had everything figured out. "I used to think I had it all figured out," I said. "Good job, nice house, family that loved me. Turns out I was just naive." "Or maybe you were just trusting people who didn't deserve it." "Same thing, isn't it?" Eddie was quiet for a moment, watching the teenagers disappear around a corner. "When I was a cop," he said finally, "I learned that there are 2 kinds of people in the world, predators and prey. The predators take what they want, and the prey let them do it. Most people are prey. They go along to get along, avoid conflict, hope that being nice will protect them. And the predators? The predators know that being nice doesn't protect you. Being strong does. Being willing to fight back does. So which one am I? Eddie looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Right now, you're prey learning to be a predator. Question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? That afternoon, I picked up Beth and Janie from school and took them for ice cream. It was one of our traditions, something we'd done every Tuesday for the past 2 years, but today it felt different. More precious, maybe, because I didn't know how many more Tuesdays we'd have like this. "Daddy," Janie said, chocolate ice cream smeared across her chin, "why doesn't Mommy live with us anymore?" I'd been dreading this question, even though I knew it was coming. Beth was watching me carefully, old enough to understand more than she let on. "Sometimes grown-ups need some space to figure things out," I said, which was the truth without being the whole truth. "Are you and Mommy getting divorced?" Beth asked quietly. There was no point in lying. They'd figure it out soon enough. "Yeah, sweetheart, we are." Janie's face crumpled. "But I don't want you to get divorced." "I know, baby. I don't want it either. But sometimes people change, and they can't be married anymore." "Is it because of us?" Beth's voice was small, scared. "No." I reached across the table and took both their hands. "This has nothing to do with you two. You are the best things that ever happened to me, and that will never change. No matter what happens between Mommy and me, we both love you more than anything in the world." "Will we still live in our house?" Janie asked. "For now, and no matter where we live, we'll still be a family. It'll just look a little different." We finished our ice cream in relative quiet, then drove home. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed Laura's car parked at the curb. She was sitting on our front porch, looking nervous. "Mommy!" Janie ran to her, and Laura scooped her up in a hug that looked desperate. "Hi, baby. I missed you so much." Beth was more reserved, accepting her mother's hug but not returning it with the same enthusiasm. At 12, she was starting to pick up on the undercurrents that Janie missed. "Can we talk?" Laura asked me over the girls' heads. We sent Beth and Janie inside to do homework, while Laura and I sat on the porch swing we'd installed when we first bought the house. It felt strange, sitting there with her like we used to do in the evenings, talking about our days and making plans for the weekend. "The girls seem to be handling this well," she said. "They're resilient." "I told Scott what you said, about staying away from them for now." "And?" "He understands. He doesn't want to make this harder on them than it has to be." I almost laughed. Scott was worried about making things hard on my daughters while he was sleeping with their mother. "How considerate of him." Laura sighed. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry, Laura. I'm disappointed." "In me?" "In all of it. In the way this happened, the way everyone handled it, the way you're still handling it." "What do you mean?" I looked at her sitting there in her yoga pants and designer t-shirt, her hair pulled back in the ponytail she'd worn since college. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. But she was also a stranger now, someone who could lie to my face for months while planning to leave me. "I mean the way you keep trying to manage my reactions, the way you and your family and Scott all seem to think you can control how this plays out." "We're trying to make this as painless as possible." "For who?" "Because it's not painless for me, and it's sure as hell not painless for the girls." Laura was quiet for a moment, watching a neighbor walk their dog down the street. "What do you want me to do, Jason? I can't change how I feel." "I don't want you to change how you feel. I want you to stop pretending this is something it's not." "What do you mean?" "I mean, stop pretending this is some noble sacrifice for the good of the family. You wanted to sleep with your boss, so you did. You wanted a different life, so you're taking it. Just own it." Her face flushed. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" We sat in silence for a while, watching our neighborhood go about its evening routine. Kids playing in yards, people coming home from work, the normal rhythms of suburban life that we'd been part of for so long. "I never meant to hurt you," Laura said finally. "But you did it anyway." "Yes." "And you'd do it again?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been respect. "Yes," she said quietly. "I would." At least it was honest. After Laura left, I helped the girls with their homework and made dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, their favorite. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about school and friends and all the normal things that filled up a normal evening. But I kept thinking about what Eddie had said about predators and prey, and about the look in Laura's eyes when she admitted she'd hurt me again if she had to. That night, after the girls were asleep, I sat in my garage and made a list. Not a to-do list or a shopping list, but a different kind of list. Names and dates and details about the people who'd been lying to me. Laura. 6 months of deception, maybe longer. Scott. Using his position to seduce my wife, then trying to manipulate my job to keep me quiet. Melissa. Knowing about the affair and helping to cover it up. Susan and George, Laura's parents, throwing me a birthday party to celebrate my humiliation. Rick, Melissa's husband, going along with the whole charade because it was easier than standing up for what was right. The list grew longer as I thought about it. Friends who'd probably known and said nothing. Co-workers who'd been whispering behind my back. A whole network of people who'd decided that dependable, reliable Jason would just take whatever they dished out. I folded the list and put it in my wallet, then went inside and poured myself a drink. As I sat in my living room, surrounded by family photos and memories of a life that was ending, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't sad anymore. I was planning. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the kitchen of the house I'd shared with Laura for 8 years, watching my daughters eat breakfast and pretend everything was normal. Beth had developed a habit of checking her phone constantly, as if she was waiting for news that would change everything back to the way it used to be. Janie had started having nightmares, waking up crying for her mommy who wasn't there anymore. "Daddy," Janie said, stirring her cereal into mush, "can we call Mommy?" "She's at work, sweetheart. You'll see her this weekend." "But I want to see her now." Beth looked up from her phone with the kind of exasperated expression that only 12-year-olds could master. "She's not coming back, Janie. They're getting divorced." "Beth," I warned. "What?" "It's true. Everyone knows it's true." Everyone, including apparently my daughter's classmates and their parents. Small-town gossip traveled fast, especially when it involved affairs and divorce. I'd been getting looks at the grocery store, sympathetic smiles from other parents at school pickup, the kind of attention that made me want to disappear. After dropping the girls at school, I drove to the Henderson construction site, a luxury housing development on the outskirts of Dallas. It was one of my bigger projects, 40 houses ranging from $500,000 to $2 million, the kind of place where Scott's wealthy friends would live. My crew was already hard at work when I arrived, the sound of hammers and power tools filling the morning air. These were good men, most of them Mexican immigrants who worked harder than anyone had a right to expect. They respected me because I treated them fairly and didn't ask them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. "Morning, boss," called out Miguel, my lead foreman. He was in his 50s, with calloused hands and the kind of work ethic that put younger men to shame. "Morning, Miguel. How are we looking today?" "Good. The foundation crew finished the Martinez house yesterday, and the framers are ready to start on the Johnson place." We walked through the site, checking progress and discussing the day's priorities. It was familiar work, comforting in its routine. Here, at least, I knew what I was doing. Here, I was still in control. My phone buzzed with a text from Scott. "Need to see you in my office. 2 p.m. I showed the message to Miguel. "Think you can handle things without me this afternoon?" He grinned. "I've been building houses since before you were born, boss. I think we'll manage." Scott's office felt different this time. Smaller, somehow, despite its expensive furnishings. He was sitting behind his desk when I arrived, but he didn't get up to greet me. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him with the kind of casual authority that rich men used when they wanted to remind you who was in charge. "We need to talk about the Henderson project," he said without preamble. "What about it?" "I'm reassigning it to Dave Martinez." Dave Martinez was another site manager, a competent enough guy but nowhere near as experienced as me. More importantly, he was one of Scott's golf buddies, the kind of man who said yes to everything and never asked uncomfortable questions. "Why?" Scott leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I think it's best for everyone involved. Given the situation with Laura, it might be awkward for you to be managing a project that involves so many of our mutual friends." Mutual friends. He meant his friends, the wealthy clients who'd be buying those expensive houses, the same people who'd probably heard about his affair with my wife and were curious to see how the wronged husband would handle it. "I see. Dave's a good manager. The project will be in capable hands. And what will I be managing instead?" Scott's smile was thin and satisfied. "I'm putting you on the Riverside project." Riverside, a low-income housing development on the other side of town, the kind of project that generated minimal profit and maximum headaches. It was where Scott sent managers he wanted to punish without firing them outright. That's quite a demotion. It's a lateral move, same pay, same responsibilities. Different prestige? I'm not sure I know what you mean. I stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the parking garage where his Porsche gleamed in its reserved spot. A new Porsche, I noticed. Apparently, the insurance money from the vandalism had allowed him to upgrade. You know, Scott, when I first started working here, you told me something I've never forgotten. What's that? You said that in business, you're either growing or you're dying. There's no standing still. That's true. So which one am I doing? Growing or dying? Scott was quiet for a moment, probably trying to figure out where I was going with this. I'd say you're stabilizing. Stabilizing. I turned back to face him. That's a nice way of saying dying. Jason. It's okay, Scott, I understand. You're protecting your investment. Laura's your investment now, and I'm a potential liability. You can't have the wronged husband managing projects for your wealthy friends. Too much drama, too much risk of me saying something embarrassing at a client dinner. That's not... It's exactly that. I sat back down, but this time I didn't lean back in submission. I sat forward, elbows on my knees, the way Eddie had taught me to position myself before a fight. But here's the thing you might not have considered. What's that? I'm very good at my job. Better than Dave Martinez, better than most of your other managers. The Henderson project is worth about $20 million, and you're putting it in the hands of someone who's never managed anything bigger than a strip mall. Scott's jaw tightened. Dave's perfectly capable. Dave's a yes man who'll do whatever you tell him to do, even if it's wrong, even if it costs you money. Are you threatening me again? I'm giving you professional advice, the same advice you'd pay a consultant thousands of dollars to give you. I stood up and headed for the door. But hey, it's your company, your money. I was almost to the elevator when Scott caught up with me. Wait. I turned around, keeping my expression neutral. What would it take? He asked quietly. For what? For you to stay on Henderson, to make this work without complications. I pretended to consider it, though I'd been planning this conversation for days. Double my bonus percentage on the project. That's 20% instead of 10, and I want it in writing. Scott's face went red. That's robbery. That's the cost of sleeping with your site manager's wife. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. Let me know what you decide. The doors closed on his furious expression. That evening, I took the girls to Eddie's gym. He'd been teaching them basic self-defense, not because I expected them to need it, but because I wanted them to understand that they didn't have to be victims of other people's choices. Remember, Eddie was saying to Beth as she practiced throwing punches at a small, heavy bag, it's not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being willing to fight back. What if someone's bigger than me? She asked. Then you be smarter, faster, more determined. Janie was working on her stance, her little face scrunched up in concentration as she tried to remember everything Eddie had taught her. Like this, Mr. Eddie? Perfect, kiddo. Now show me what you do if someone grabs your arm. She twisted away from his grip and ran toward me, exactly like he'd taught her. Good girl, I said, scooping her up in a hug. What's the most important thing? Get away and find help, she recited. That's right. After the lesson, Eddie and I sat on the gym steps while the girls played on a small playground next to the building. How are they handling everything? He asked. Better than I expected. Kids are resilient. And how are you handling everything? I told him about the meeting with Scott, about the Henderson project and the Riverside demotion. So what did you do? I made him a counteroffer he can't refuse. Eddie raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning he can either pay me double to manage his prestigious project professionally, or he can explain to his wealthy clients why their houses are behind schedule and over budget. And if he calls your bluff, then I'll make sure his clients know exactly why their project is failing. Eddie was quiet for a moment, watching my daughters chase each other around the playground equipment. You know there's no going back from this, right? Once you start playing hardball with guys like Scott, it becomes a war. It was already a war. I just didn't know I was fighting. And Laura? How's she going to react when she finds out you're squeezing her boyfriend for money? I thought about that conversation we'd had on the porch, about how she'd admitted she'd hurt me again if she had to. Laura made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside was a revised contract for the Henderson project, signed by Scott and witnessed by his secretary. Double bonus, just like I'd asked for. There was also a handwritten note. This doesn't change anything between us. I folded the note and put it in my wallet next to the list of names I'd been keeping. Scott was right. It didn't change anything, but it was a start. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, instantly awake the way parents learn to be when they have children. Mr. Thompson? This is Officer Patricia Vance with the Dallas Police Department. We have your wife here, and she asked us to call you. My blood went cold. Is she hurt? What happened? She's not injured, but she's been in an accident. She's going to need someone to pick her up. I threw on clothes and called Mrs. Dalton, my elderly neighbor who'd become my emergency babysitter since the separation. She was at my door in 5 minutes, her gray hair in curlers and a concerned expression on her face. Go, she said, shooing me toward my truck. I'll watch the girls. The police station was a low brick building that looked exactly like what it was, a place where bad things got processed and filed away. I found Laura in the lobby, sitting on a plastic chair and staring at her hands. She looked smaller than usual, fragile in a way I hadn't seen since the early days of our marriage when she used to have anxiety attacks. Laura? She looked up, and I saw that she'd been crying. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and there was a small cut on her lower lip. Jason, thank you for coming. Officer Vance was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen everything twice. She gestured for me to follow her to a small office where we could talk privately. Your wife was involved in a single-car accident around midnight, she explained. She hit a tree on Mockingbird Lane, not far from the Winston construction offices. Was she drinking? Her blood alcohol was .08, technically legal, but close to the limit. More importantly, she was extremely upset when we found her, kept talking about how everything was falling apart. I looked through the office window at Laura, who was still staring at her hands like they held the answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Is she being charged with anything? No. Like I said, she wasn't legally drunk, and there's no evidence of reckless driving. Sometimes people just lose control of their vehicles. Officer Vance's expression suggested she'd seen plenty of people lose control of more than just their cars. But Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, is there anything going on at home that we should know about? Domestic violence, threats, anything like that? We're getting divorced. It's been difficult. She mentioned that. She also mentioned someone named Scott. Said he was pressuring her about something. That was interesting. I filed it away for later consideration. Scott's her boyfriend, my former boss. Officer Vance nodded like this was a story she'd heard before. Well, she's free to go, but I'd recommend keeping an eye on her for the next few days. People in emotional distress sometimes make poor decisions. Laura was silent during the drive to Melissa's house, where she'd been staying since we separated. She stared out the passenger window at the empty Dallas streets, her hands folded in her lap. Do you want to talk about what happened? I asked as we pulled into Melissa's driveway. Not really. The officer said you were upset about something involving Scott. Laura's laugh was bitter and humorless. Scott's having second thoughts. About what? About us, about leaving his wife, about all of it. She turned to look at me for the first time since I'd picked her up. Apparently, divorce is messier than he expected. Messier how? His wife hired a private investigator. Found out about the affair, about me, about everything. She's threatening to take him for half of everything he owns. I tried to look sympathetic, but inside I was calculating. Scott's wife, Patricia, was old Dallas money, the kind of woman who came from generations of wealth and knew how to protect it. If she was threatening divorce, she had leverage that went far beyond just the affair. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Not because I felt bad for Laura and Scott, but because I was genuinely sorry that my daughters were going to be caught in the middle of this mess. Are you? Laura asked. Sorry, I mean. I'm sorry our girls are going to have to watch their mother's heart get broken by the same man who broke up their parents' marriage. Laura flinched like I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Isn't it? We sat in silence for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled down. He wants me to wait, Laura said finally. Give him time to work things out with Patricia, figure out a settlement that won't destroy him financially. And you said? I said I'd already waited 6 months for him to leave his wife, and I wasn't going to wait any more. So you drove to his office at midnight to tell him that? I drove to his office to tell him that if he didn't choose me, I was going to choose myself. There was something in her voice that I recognized, the same determination she'd had in college when she decided to change her major, or when she'd insisted we buy our house even though we couldn't really afford it. Laura had always been decisive once she made up her mind about something. And what did he say? He said I was being unreasonable, that I didn't understand the complexities of his situation. I almost laughed. Scott had used the same condescending tone with Laura that he'd been using with me for years. The difference was that Laura had finally heard it. So what happens now? Now I figure out what I want my life to look like without him in it. She got out of the truck and started walking toward Melissa's front door, then stopped and turned back. Jason? Yeah? I know you probably think I deserve this. And maybe I do. But I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt the girls. I know. Do you think they'll forgive me? It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Beth and Janie loved their mother, but they weren't stupid. They could see what the divorce was doing to our family, even if they didn't understand all the reasons behind it. They're your daughters, I said finally. They'll love you no matter what. But forgiveness? That's something you'll have to earn. After Laura disappeared into Melissa's house, I sat in my truck for a few minutes and thought about what I'd just learned. Scott was having second thoughts about leaving his wife. Patricia Winston had hired a private investigator and was threatening to take Scott for everything he was worth. Laura was finally seeing Scott for what he really was, a man who wanted to have his cake and eat it too. It was almost too perfect. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Detective Ray Kowalski, the cop who'd called me about Scott's vandalized car. Kowalski. Detective, this is Jason Thompson. We spoke a few weeks ago about the vandalism at Scott Winston's house. Right, the tire slashing. What can I do for you? I was wondering if you could put me in touch with whoever handles white-collar crime. I think I might have some information about financial irregularities at Winston Construction. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve burying hazardous waste under residential foundations. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Thompson, are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about my daughters sleeping peacefully in their beds, trusting that their father would protect them from the chaos that adults created. I thought about Laura sitting in that police station, finally understanding that Scott Winston wasn't the man she thought he was. I thought about all the people who'd lied to me, manipulated me, and assumed I'd just take whatever they dished out. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Okay, let me give you a number to call. After I hung up, I drove home through the empty Dallas streets, past the construction sites and office buildings and suburban neighborhoods where people slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to change. Mrs. Dalton was waiting for me in my kitchen, a cup of tea cooling on the table in front of her. Everything all right, dear? Everything's fine, Mrs. Dalton. Laura had a minor accident, but she's okay. And the girls? Still sleeping. She gathered her purse and headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Jason, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think you're handling this whole situation with remarkable grace. Thank you. A lot of men would have done something stupid by now, something they'd regret later. I thought about the phone call I'd just made, about the information I was planning to share with the white-collar crime unit. The night's still young, Mrs. Dalton. She laughed, thinking I was joking, and let herself out. I poured myself a drink and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where my daughters played every day. In a few hours, they'd wake up and want breakfast and help with their homework, and I'd give them all the normal, stable things that children needed from their parents. But first, I had some calls to make. Some calls to... The reckoning was about to begin.